We've got no economists this time. We're going to have a really wide-ranging discussion which will cover both infrastructure and property, and you never know, with Max here, we might even get a bit of politics in. Deborah, I'm going to start with you. We've got some low interest rates. We've never seen rates as low as this before. Do you think this is really going to boost commercial property investment in this country?
Certainly don't think it's going to be a bad thing. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the office sector to lock in some really good long-term low debt funding, and I think that certainly is a good thing for the industry.
Are people doing it?
Beg pardon?
Are people doing it?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And getting good tenor and getting longer debt again, which coming out of the GFC, we all remember was difficult getting long-term funds. But that's all available again. The markets are open, and I think most good investors are putting that in place and locking it in.
Do you think we'll see a rise in building activity in this area, or do you think perhaps the demand is not strong enough?
The answer to that question is not an easy one. I think there's many of the property fundamentals that all need to be in place before big construction projects can get underway, and ultimately that's about a strong economy being in place and needing the growth. It's really interesting to see Sydney at the moment with all of the Barangaroo development. In my lifetime I can't remember looking down on a construction site and seeing that much happening in one place. I can't see much happening in Melbourne over the next few years, however. So every market in Australia is different at the moment, is what we're observing.
Tony Abbott is going to, actually both Kevin Rudd and Tony Abbott are talking about infrastructure as an important bridge from the mining investment boom. Because that's in decline, they're looking for something to replace it, and we discussed this at the last session. Do you think, first of all, has the superannuation money movement got the money to fund a lot of infrastructure?
Certainly the superannuation industry, particularly the profit to members or the industry funds, have had a long history of investing in infrastructure. And if you just think about Australia's infrastructure, whether it's ports or roads, airports, freight, much of it is now owned by super funds, both domestically and offshore. So there's money there, but it really needs to be for the right assets and the right structure.
And what are you looking for? What to get a good asset? How do you make sure you don't invest in the Lane Cove Tunnel, for example?
Well, we've all learnt lessons from that. But the best type of infrastructure for super funds is really brownfield, because what super funds are looking for is a consistent running yield. And it's interesting to see what's happening in New South Wales, where the government is selling off its brownfield, and you can have a look at the ports and the desal plant. Very competitive process, lots of interest. And then they say they're going to take the proceeds, invest in greenfield, where arguably the government is best placed to take the early risk, develop up those assets and then put them back into the market, have them competitively bid again, and continue to recycle the capital. So we see brownfield assets in the hands of super funds and other institutions, and the government playing a very key role in developing greenfield, where the risk is often too large for the super funds. So I think that's a model that's got lots of appeal, and the other states should look at it as well.
Do you think that this will reduce demand for property because the superannuation money will be siphoned off into the infrastructure?
Money into commercial office in Australia comes from all sorts of sources. I don't think that certainly if some of the superannuation money goes into those more infrastructure sorts of assets, then yes, it might divert from the office market.
Although the funds actually, their asset allocation provides for both. The large funds, which are now tens of billions of dollars, have got ample capacity to invest in both unlisted property and infrastructure. And indeed we've seen a lot of interest from the Canadian, the US, the Danish funds in both property and infrastructure. So there's a lot of competition, not all of it from domestic players.
Max, should we have mandatory quotas on boards? I suppose they mean that male and female. What do you think? Elana?
Well, I'm in favour of having boards with a range of skills, people of diverse backgrounds, skills, experience, gender, ethnicity. I think that if you want to have a well-functioning board that really does its governance role to the best standard, you need to have a board that's capable of a very fulsome and diverse debate. So when I think about quotas in the context of gender diversity, I look at the current stats and think, well, you know, the current stat shows that less than 25% of ASX 200 directorships are held by women. I know that in terms of education, training, skills, women are far better represented than they are at a board table. So I applaud the voluntary position that many companies have taken consistent with the ASX guidelines, but in my mind, if those guidelines weren't to affect significant change, I'd be all for quotas. And I say that because quotas would be a transitional mechanism for me. Women go to university in equal numbers, they graduate through most faculties in more than equal numbers, they enter the professional services firms more than 50%, but it's only as you go through senior positions do they fall away. So we actually have a pool of very highly educated, trained and capable women where the return on investment of education and training is minimal. If we can't address that in a voluntary sense by really opening up and being a meritocracy, I'd be all for quotas.
Brief answer from...
I have female directors on both of my boards. I have a female chief executive on the Sydney Airport board, and the majority of my senior executives at Sydney Airport are female. And I regard myself as extremely fortunate because they are fantastic executives. I don't want the chief executive to take too much from it, but I mean, a really top-notch chief executive. They contribute the specialist knowledge that Elana's referred to. They've got experience, they've got relevant experience. I think this is just inevitable. I think it's happening. I am absolutely, totally opposed to quotas. I think it falls into what we've been talking about earlier. You know, somebody saying, let's make another rule, let's make another regulation, let's do something to tell everybody what they've got to do. For God's sake, and the ASX ought to wake up to itself and focus on people either stealing money or not earning enough.
Very quickly, Deborah, because I want one more question to finish.
I'm absolutely not a fan of quotas. I think Elana expressed it very eloquently.
Okay, last question. What do you see as the scariest black swan event that we might face in Australia in the next 5 to 10 years? Don't need to go into a whole lot of detail. What sort of sits out there that makes you a bit scared? Deborah, do you want to start?
Look, the two things that spring to mind for me are some form of an energy crisis. I don't know how that happens, but you know, that could bring any number of countries to their knees if something like that were to happen. And look, there's a part of me that thinks maybe the radical Islam thing is we haven't seen the end of that, and that worries me.
Okay, Max?
I tend to agree with that. We're a society which is impacted by things that happen elsewhere more than anything else. So if another GFC, if the US Congress can't resolve its deadlocks, radical Islam, I think, in the Middle East is a huge issue. But we have to have a flexible enough economic framework and governmental framework to deal with it, because there will be a shock of some sort. You can't define it. I just think we need to be ready and have enough flexibility to adjust to it. And we've done that in the past, and I think we can do it again.
Elana?
Added to that, I would put on my list, if China significantly disappoints either in terms of its growth or its modernisation, it is so central not just to our economic well-being, but also to the economic well-being of the states and other economies, that if it went into a totally different direction or fell off the rails, that would have significant implications.
Well, there you are. You've had an absolute smorgasbord of different ideas and subjects, and I do thank you for all the questions you put forward on the via the SMS, because it certainly helped me broaden the whole discussion out. You know, as we look at the three conversations that I've been involved in, this one, The Economist, and with John Howard, you can't help feeling that although we have a lot of imperfections in the place, and they've been certainly very eloquently set out by all the different speakers in those three sessions, it's not a bad place to be. And a lot of that money that's coming in from overseas is coming in simply because there is a feeling that, hey, this is a place that can do very well. This is a place that does have political security. We're going to see on September 7, let's say the polls are right, a change in administration, and it'll be just as smooth as the change in the administration in 2007. And thus it will be as it changes again. So we have a dedication to a democratic changing situation. Yes, we have some weaknesses in our politicians. Maybe we need the odd crisis or two. That certainly brings forward change, and we're capable of doing that if that did take place. But I'd like to thank the three of you for a marvellous presentation, and could you give them a hand? Thank you.